A pleasure to meet all at last, and welcome back to films I should have talked about years ago. And now what we're going to do for today is talk a bit about a rather obscured cult film by any means. I don't know if it's old enough to be called a classic, but here's the thing. DreamWorks' Shrek has hit big in the box office and by critics. For a period of about 10 years, it was well known for displaying fairy tales, ogres, donkeys, and princesses, as well as dragons, in such unique glory. But Ogre 2008, which came out a year after Shrek the Third, was basically a whole different concept. As the tagline itself suggested, no donkey, no fairy tale, just terror. It is in fact the rather terrifying, unique power that the ogre creature itself holds. Of course, like hundreds of other things out there that are deemed mythical, the ogre is not existent in real life. Nor could we find the likes of most other things like dragons and even Ninja Turtles. While it does suck, I mean, it really goes to show, people can be rather creative at times, even going so far as to constantly have beliefs that such things like the vampire monkey, chupacabra, unicorn, Bigfoot, a lot of these things seem to be existent at some point. Whether it's through someone's own fabrication or if it is in fact an entitled yet elaborate scheme that somebody constructs on their own, it can still be deemed irrelevant or irresponsible by any means. But in this exact case, we have the Dukes of Hazzard's own John Schneider going into a town in the year of 1859. For almost 150 years, this town in Pennsylvania is home to a small amount of people. A small amount of people with a curse. A curse that every single year they must sacrifice one of their own to a large, gnarly, and terrifying beast, simply called the Ogre. And the reason for this was because, at some point in the 19th century, they had gone downhill very fast. They were suffering from a combination of disease and crop failure. But thanks to a little deal that was organized with some black magic, they were actually able to help fix all of this. In turn, for an annual sacrifice to an ogre, they would have eternal life, combined with plentiful crops on a daily basis, as well as zero need to worry about any such thing as sickness or aging. So the thing is, it's basically both good and bad, all blended together into one small township. Unfortunately though, in the present day, as the film depicts, a small group of travelers are out in the woods looking for a campground to go to. One of them ends up injuring himself, and they all must find help. So two of these people go out and stumble across this exact town. This town was unfortunately sealed off, but not really in the best way you would have hoped. A lineup of stones was actually supposed to represent the borderline to the town itself. Anywhere outside of it, and it would actually act as a death zone. Anyone who would step out of it would basically get themselves killed. And as for the ogre itself, it was still alive and still prowling around, terrifying the crap out of the villagers. But the thing is, these four outsiders, as they're known as, they're basically unwelcome by any means, because the two that enter are actually captured and thrown to jail, and were actually meant to become a way to avoid any further death within the town itself. Any of the population that was actually with the town the whole time since the deal was made, for them to have this annual tradition take place. Basically, these two survivors would actually account for about a 2-year threshold to allow them to come up with the plan to actually take out the ogre once and for all. But of course, they actually escape. These two escape with some help from the town itself. It seems that there are a small group of people that are still alive within the town, including Father Henry's own daughter. She herself actually had learned a lot about different things like magic and science and crafting. Basically all the necessities that would be necessary just to survive if such a huge, lumbering, fat-bodied monster were all over the place. And let's be real about the monster itself, though. The way that it's animated with CG, it's kind of crappy, but I feel like that it speaks for itself. If anything, it could be like many of those modern-day Roger Corman films, perhaps. It just seems to be that not every monster movie is meant to be perfect by any means. Well, what kind of purpose exactly do we see here? I don't know if there's any at all, or maybe there's something else I could highlight here. Anyways, though, back to the plot. Eventually a plan is orchestrated. Combined with both the outsiders and the rest of the surviving population of the town itself, they formulate a plan to take out the monster himself. They fake a sacrifice. They basically stage a person basically locked up on that one post that has been used every single year for the monster to eventually come by and grab the person out and kill him. But the thing is, it was actually staged this time. The person who was locked up in the shackles actually had the key on him. And when she did, well, they all came together, loaded with guns, bows, and any other kind of weapon they could find. And they would also be able to restrain the monster by chaining him to the ground with a giant stake implanted. Unfortunately, this only proves to be somewhat effective, because it eventually breaks free. They have to come up with another plan to do so. They eventually find out that there is in fact a magic spell that Hope herself had learned, and she could actually help take out the monster for good if she perfects it in time. There, of course, was also this spell that was used, lighting a candle, putting salt outside your house. It would create some sort of barrier to prevent your home from being destroyed by the monster himself. Every time at night, he basically wanders around the town and tries to pick off any stragglers that could be outside. And the thing is, it only worked somewhat well that night. Of course, I should mention, probably the biggest, most important part of the whole plot itself is when the two remaining survivors of the four, unfortunately 2 were killed early on, but the other 2, they actually go down to a sheriff's station, try to explain what happened, and when they're unable to find information, they actually steal one of the police cars on the driveway. They head back straight to the town, and they actually have themselves weapons that can actually prove to be useful. They were able to help make the plan work, after all. Some shots from a shotgun were actually able to stagger the monster and even temporarily disorient it. So, the shotgun proved to be really effective. But compared to many others, it was not so well done. However, though, they didn't have to worry about much of that, because after all, by the end of the movie, we actually find out the true way to kill the ogre. By stepping out of the boundary. That's right. Well, as I've said before, the stone line boundary is supposed to represent the border. Anyone were to dare step outside of it and they would cease to exist. They would shrivel up into a beam of light and disappear. And the monster is no different. The ogre is finally defeated after accidentally stepping outside of the boundary to the town itself. And when that happens, the town is saved. Everybody is now relieved to never again be burdened by lifelong trauma and decades of destruction and arrogance. So of course, that pretty much just marks the end of this film. How exactly do I feel about this one compared to most other monster movies that were pretty crappy for the time? Because looking at them today, they definitely could have been treated a little bit better, but for 2008, Ogre, was a pretty unique example. It was also one of the first instances that I distinctly remember hearing about unrated films. Yeah, this was the first ever instance that I ever saw a film in my whole life that was unrated. Because there was a special edition DVD release that I saw at a Blockbuster many years ago, not long after it came out, and it actually said unrated in a giant marketing sticker on the front. So, when you really think about it, unrated honestly meant anything at all. Could it be worse than rated R? But then again, there's also NC-17, which I didn't even hear about until much later. So, at this point, ratings could be all over the place, and I just have no idea what they are. But yet, I do have a pretty long life ahead of me to find out exactly what could take place. No matter the case, I do kind of like this film for what it is. An unrated film, the first ever unrated film I ever heard of, and I was really interested in it when I first saw the trailer itself. I figured that it was going to be something like Shrek. But wow. Looking at it again, the first time I've ever watched it, wow. It's so much different. It is not a friendly ogre with a donkey and whatnot. I guess I should have paid a little more attention to the tagline on the DVD that I saw at Blockbuster that time. Anyways, my ranking for this, it does have a decent cast, has a nice laid plot, has itself something very plausible that would definitely compare it to most modern kaiju films by many known creators, but unfortunately, it's pretty low budget in terms of feel, and it just does not look like a quality product, at least compared to most others. But only in comparison, might I just add, emphasize on that. So overall, 7.7 out of 10.1 is what I give to this. Has pretty dang good things going on, and it really just is an incredible film by any means. Super underappreciated by this point. 14 years later, I've seen it again, and I sure did get a nice kick out of it, just like I did the first time I ever even saw it, or even heard about it. But for 2008, there were definitely a lot of other better, well-known picks. So with that in mind, this is just it. But keep in mind that I will be getting close to the very end of this series once again. So I will have a few other picks here and there. So if you want to see them and others, make sure that you like, subscribe, comment, follow me on social media, and stay on the Hollywood side.